Namaste. Good morning. I was trying to figure out what you were doing here. And I asked a few people, what are you doing here? Seemed like a direct way to find out. And then I asked other people, what do you think people are coming here for? And I got answers like nostalgia. I would conclude it has to do with spending a weekend with satsang or sangha among a community of beings who are sharing something in common about awakening awareness. I would imagine that it has something to do with looking for clues from each other as to how we function with any degree of consciousness in our present moment in time and space in what's called the 80s. I imagine for some, it's a chance to do purification. Some are alone a lot and feel the need for connection. That's the satsang part, social part. And some want to get high. We are an interesting collection because some of us have been through a lot from a spiritual path, conscious, intentional point of view. Some of us in this room have been through a lot of practices, have been through the 60s, have been through the narcissistic 70s, as they are called, have been through a lot of commitment, a lot of despair, a lot of letting go of forms, a lot of wondering, did I lose it? Did I lose my connection to spirit? And are listening to hear what's happening to them as they just go about living life. And for some people in this room, the dreams of the 60s, of it was all going to suddenly turn into light. And all of the forms of society were going to change, and it was going to be immediately heaven on earth. Are just memories. And all of the flower dresses and all of the colorful shirts have somehow disappeared into the back of the closet. or been used for something else as we dress more and more like everyone else. And I'm sure there are some of us who recognize that as themselves. Then there are others who are, so to speak, just coming out of the woodwork. They've been living their life, feeling things inside themselves, but because they had no context in which to feel them, they treated them as sort of embarrassing aberrations. I mean, imagine somebody who is, say, a stockbroker. I'm sure that's what Reagan imagines a lot. Let's pick somebody else. Imagine someone who is a stockbroker and who has a family and commutes and just lives life and bought into the model that life was just what it appears to be in the physical, psychological sense. It's a material, psychological condition that is finite, that will end. And then, let's say, that person has these moments, now and then, tired, coming home on the train, looking out the window at the reflection of, say, her or his own face, and the passing towns and all, spaces out, although that word isn't part of that vocabulary, and experiences another quality of awareness. And then the train, they call the station, the person says, well, I'm overtired, my head's crazy. Crazy is the word we usually use. Weird, strange. I remember being with my mother the week before she died in the hospital, and she was on morphine and I was on mescaline. And we met in a space where there was no mother, and there was no child. We just met in a space of, are you here? I'm here. There was no birth and there was no death. There was no drama going down. There was no hospital. There was just shared awareness. Now, to me, that was that was graceful. The next day, my mother said to me, when I came into the hospital, and I said, wasn't that lovely being together yesterday that way? She said, they gave me drugs. I was out of my mind. And she rejected, in total, from her other space, from the middle-class Jewish Boston woman, this other experience, because she had no conceptual framework in order to understand what had happened to her. Other than, I was drugged, I was out of my mind. Now, there are some people in this room who lived a lot of their life just like that. And then, somehow, the zeitgeist, the space, the psychological space, the social, political, intellectual space of these past years, the books in the bookstore and all, something connected, and suddenly what was treated as weird, as background in one's life, as opposed to the important things, flipped and started to become figure. It started to stand out. It suddenly became as if you had been asleep all your life, although you had been waking up but then making believe it was just a dream in order to hold on to the sleep. Suddenly there was some awakening happening inside you. And for some of those people, when they began to realize they weren't alone in this, and they started to acknowledge it within their own being, they look back over the years and they see how many times they actually tasted that, but had no dealings with it. Because literally every being is constantly going in and out of realm after realm of awareness. And in every being is all of it, all the time. And it's just the decision to stay on one frequency of thought for most people. This is reality. My parents used to say, come down to reality, Richard. Be practical, come back to reality. That one space precluded the dealing with anything else. Now, a lot of those people, when they started to experience that feeling in themselves, there were categories that went through the head. I'm going insane. First of all, because of the nature of the relationships with the people around them, there was nobody to talk to. There was nobody that would understand what they were talking about. You start saying, gee, I was walking the other day and I suddenly felt at one with everything in the universe, to a fellow. What? Somebody in the shop? Hey man, take an aspirin. Yeah? I must be insane. Or does this mean that I'm going to lose everything I've built in my life? Am I going to have to change everything now? Am I going to be one of those weirdos? I mean, I may not be insane, but to be what I'm feeling and to have it manifest, does it mean I got to join something? Do I have to wear a certain color? Do I have to smile a certain way? Do I have to go to meetings? Am I now in some kind of minority group? Have I just become part of a minority when I was a good wasp before this? These must be familiar to somebody here. I must be talking to somebody. So we have a gathering of old burnouts and closet mystics. That's two categories. That's not all inclusive. I assume there are some other subtle categories that I have missed. No, there are others of us, and there's a goodly number actually in this room, who have gone through all of that and understand that all of it is the process and are just riding with it and saying, yeah, right, far out, isn't it? Heavy duty. Here we are. And are experiencing a flip of consciousness that allows them to function quite comfortably, quote, in the world, and yet understand the statement, I am in the world but not of the world. And even be getting better at being in the world because they are less attached. They're beginning to understand that they can be more involved, yet less attached. Now that's, for some of you, that is very confusing. And I hope in the course of these couple of days it will become more so. because, unlike most people you come to hear, my goal is not to take away confusion. Because there's a beautiful line in Suzuki Roshi, Beginner's Mind. I can quote it to you, but I'd rather read it to you. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. And if you walk away from here thinking, well, that's where it's at, now I know, you just calcified again. I'm somebody who knows where it's at. I know what I'm doing, I know where I'm going, I know who I am, and I know how soon I'll get there. I have 7 more births. It's that kind of... Strangely enough, confusion, which has been a kind of a no-no in our world. You're confused, see a therapist. Confusion becomes the fertile field in which it's all possible. And when that reporter, when I said to her, I have no idea who I am, that was describing a state of evolution. Confusion is another way of saying there is nowhere to stand. And before you get frightened by that statement, let me say that you are only free when you realize that it's perfectly safe to stand nowhere. Some of you are feeling fear and uneasiness about the 80s. You feel that something's hitting the fan. That economics are a bit shaky. That third world power and realignment of forces in the world, and that maybe you're standing on the top of the mountain and your days are numbered. That the toxicities in the environment, and who knows, it's turning out that the really good old things are turning out to all be producing cancer. Who knows, maybe oatmeal is going to be next on the list, you know. I mean, it's the good old things that are going. What's safe anymore? Acid rain. God. Underground reactors being prepared. I mean, I'm sure I can find something to scare you. What could scare you? Why does it scare you? It scares you because you think you need to stand somewhere. And you're afraid it's going to upset your little apple cart of where you're standing. Your little piece of earth, as the American Indians say. All I've got is what I'm standing on. But even that is in jeopardy. You are living, you are existing in form. Forms all change. It is the nature of stuff that it changes. Even plastic. In time and space, all things change. As long as you identify with anything, and as long as you believe that if any one thing changes, you will cease to exist, you are afraid. It's as simple as that. How then could all these, quote, wise persons be in the midst of chaos and be peaceful and be content? And experience life as play or delight? Were they living in a different time? Things were better then. Sure, the plagues. Incredible infant mortality. Which one do you want? Was it just a massive denial process? Were they using their religious beliefs as a kind of opiate? Were they resting in a place or resting nowhere, resting within their being, behind form? From a vantage point where they could watch forms come and forms go, and say, ah, so. Who would you be to be so free that all of the changes you can conceive of, including the annihilation of humankind, would not create fear in you exclusively? Now, I say exclusively because of a very complex point. That you as awareness, as you here, I'm here, you as awareness have at this moment taken a human birth. And that human birth has attendant to it all kinds of emotions, needs, desires, thoughts, identities. And your humanity is going to be scared. But it's not going to be the only thing you're feeling. In addition, an aware person who is standing nowhere is feeling quiet, clear, loving, present. Simultaneously, I'm a human, I'm frightened. I'm a human, I'm lonely. I'm a human, I'm lusty. I'm a human, I'm angry. I'm a human, I'm feeling self-pity. I'm a human, I'm feeling empathy. I'm a human, I'm feeling desire and concern. I'm a human, I'm feeling pain at the suffering of others. That's my humanity. In my divinity, I am. Thank you. That was quite an obstacle. When you and I take a human birth, it is so seductive that we get lost into our humanness and we lose our divinity. We get so caught into our separateness, we lose our oneness. One frequency on the television receiver gets so reinforced as reality that we forget that there are other channels and there's a meta channel and etc. If you have a newborn baby and watch it, you can see it close down. It can close down almost within, as it starts to get using its senses more and more, it starts to close down. And some babies that are born into very conscious families will stay very open about their beings for some few years before they start to close down in. Close down into thinking they are somebody doing something. Or as the Gita says, they get caught in identifying with the actor. The actor. Yesterday, I went to visit on the way up here. I had gotten a letter, so I went to visit a fellow. This letter was from a friend of this fellow's, and he said, this fellow was involved in a moped accident, and he lost one leg below the knee. He's got a wooden leg, and the other one is badly scarred, and he's been 3 months in traction in a hospital, and he's very depressed. And he's 32 or 3. So I called him and I said, I'm on my way up to New Lebanon. Can I come by and say hello? Yeah, that'd be fine. So I came in yesterday, and as I drove down the street, the little kind of dirt road that they lived on, I came to this scene in front of me where somebody was pushing a wheelchair. A man was pushing a wheelchair, and there were 2 women, and one was carrying a blanket. And I didn't register on me at first that this was who I was coming to visit. And I thought they were... My mind went in a category of old person in wheelchair. And then as I just kept going slowly behind, they turned around, and I suddenly saw that it was this fellow. I hadn't seen him before, but I realized it must be because I saw his legs in strange positions on the wheelchair. And so I waited till he got settled in the house, and then I sat down next to him. And we looked into each other's eyes. Now, this is an interesting moment. Because I have two legs. And my MG's sitting outside the door. And I'm going to be there for an hour, and then I'm going to get in the car, and I'm going to drive away, and then I'm going to walk and run. And he's not going to do any of that. And the foot that may be usable again ended up in the accident, turned around completely, and so it's all weird at this moment, and they may be able to make it so he can have a special shoe and walk with it. It's all blistered. The skin was all ripped off. Now I'm looking at that foot and this new wooden leg with the shoe and the sock on it, a plastic leg. And all the emotions are washing through me of empathy, of sadness, of despair, of all of those things. But behind it is just, yes, and this too. It's like hanging out with Shiva or Kali. It's like hanging out with that force in the universe of the unexpected, of the chaotic, of the part that isn't the part that if you were writing a nice script for a sweet God, this is what you put in. And what I could feel from this other part of me, my heart, my human heart is feeling, and hurt and sadness and all those things. This other part of me is thinking, right, new moment. Look, Ma, no legs. Interesting karma. What now? Roll shift. Take 3. Very impersonal. Very just looking like you go out and you look at all these pretty leaves. Those are all the trees. They're all dying. It's monstrous death you're seeing. Beautiful death. Pretty soon it's all going to fall. It's going to be winter. It's going to be sadness, but you can say, yeah, right. So. How do you handle both of those feelings simultaneously in you? Because if you just have the heavy karma, interesting. What a cold bastard you are. And if you've just got this, oh, God, eesh, ugh, ah. What good are you? What use are you? What can liberate what? What kind of freedom is that? At that moment went through my mind a little boy in Connaught's Circus in New Delhi. Some of you that have been in New Delhi undoubtedly have seen this little boy. He has 2 stumps here. It's like a thalidomide type. And he has only down above his knees. Everything else is cut off. And he's got a wooden platform with rollers underneath it. And he lies on his stomach, and he scoots like a bug on the water. He scoots around, across traffic everywhere. He's a beggar, and he does incredibly well. But the interesting thing about him is when you look in his eyes and you look at his face, it is filled with light. And I looked into this fellow's eyes, the fellow I was with yesterday. I said, "Hi." And I felt a lightness. First thing I felt was, here is a fellow entity. I would call it soul, but I know that word freaks some of you. Here is a fellow entity who is now going through this vehicle for growth. Now just imagine for a moment that who you are, we'll use the word soul, and if you're upset by it, it's okay, just flip it around and think of it as louse, something like that. Doesn't matter, soul. That you are a soul that wanted to explore certain things. You are a creative entity that wishes to explore certain things. In order to do that, you create a certain set of experiences in order to do that. It's like, I think I'd like to learn physics, so I'm going to enroll in a physics course. I think I would like to learn about a certain category of things, so I think I'll take a human birth. Not only will I take a human birth, but I will take a human birth that is uniquely designed for what it is that I want to learn. Just imagine now, we're just talking Meshuggah talk now. This is all psychosis, all right? Just imagine, though, that you are a soul. This is just for fun. That you are, when I say you, I'm not talking to you, Zelda, or Sam, or Frank, or Doris. I'm talking to you, this entity, who has said, gee, I'd like to do some stuff here, and I think I'll take a human birth. And you took a human birth, and what has happened in that human birth is what you designed. Now you've got to close your eyes for a minute and experience just the way your life is at this moment. We're working within this model now for a second. Your life, just the way it's been, everything you've gone through thus far, the predicament you find yourself in, the quality of your physical carrier, the vehicle, the body, with all of its beauty and decay and horror and secret little blips and things, with your personality, with all of its neurosis and uptightness and beauty and sweetness and bitchiness and everything. Your astral identity, with all of its uniqueness. Just imagine, we're just playing now, just imagine that you are at this moment in the absolute perfect moment. And this guy yesterday said to me after we've been talking for half an hour, and his lady is sort of nervously coming and going, and there's a whole lot of tension in the scene, and he said, I feel very sad when I'm here with you. I said, that's okay, and he started to sob, and he said, you know, he said, I can't sob or feel sad around most people because he said they really won't give me the space to do that. Because most people are so freaked by what's happened to him that he has to end up reassuring them. And I said, you're having a grief reaction. A part of you who you identify with has died. You're going to have a grief reaction. It's probably going to last, who knows, 6 months, a year. You're going to go in and out of it. He said, you know, reading in your book that you had been in a 3-week depression and sat in the bathtub all that time, he said, helped a lot. And after a little while, he did say, he said, I'm feeling the first peace I felt since the accident. See, I don't understand it, but I'm feeling it. We were just sitting, 30 minutes, just eyeball to eyeball. He'd look away and come right back. Because even though my heart was screaming, my head was clear and quiet and empty. Humanity was there. He could cry. He could feel pity and fear and confusion. And he also, because there was the space for him to acknowledge his humanity, he could touch the part in himself, which is, you here, I'm here. Heavy duty, isn't it? Well, what do we do now? He will forget, probably as I walk out the door, he'll be lost back into the drama. Because everybody around him is, and the situation's heavy duty and it's new. And I said to him, can you conceive of the possibility that you as a therapist somewhere wanted to develop compassion, and boy, you're going to develop it. Because there's nothing like suffering for developing compassion. I said, if you can get quiet behind this, you're going to be one hell of a therapist. I said, just can imagine if you were a ballet dancer, what problems you'd have. But you're a therapist, you don't need to. A friend of mine who started the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology did therapy for about 30 years in an iron lung. Patient sat behind him and you saw him through a mirror. Delightful person. You work with what you got. As I'm fond of saying to freak people, you and I may meet next time under a bridge eating rotted, putrid food out of a rusty tin can after the horror occurs. Maybe our skin will be falling off and we'll be bleeding. Maybe we'll be a mess. We may just happen to meet one of us too. Heavy, isn't it? Yeah. You here? Yeah, I'm here. Wow. Well, what now? New moment. Can you hear being rooted in nowhere to stand? Can you hear being rooted in just pure awareness and pure space? Not denying humanity, but not getting lost in it. Thoreau wrote, sometimes I sat in my sunny doorway from sunrise till noon, wrapped in a reverie, amidst the pines and hickories and sumacs, in undisturbed solitude and silence, while the birds sang around or flitted noiselessly through the house, until by the sun falling in at my west window or the noise of some traveler's wagon on the distant highway, I was reminded of the pass of time. I grew in those seasons like corn in the night, and they were far better than any work of the hands could have been. They were not time subtracted from my life, but so much over and above my usual allowance. I realized then what the Orientals meant by contemplation and the forsaking of work. To some extent and at rare intervals, even I am a yogi. I feel very privileged to be with you. And I know that could be said from a hypocritical point of view, but I think you can hear that my heart is true. Because to me, I don't know what else I would like to be with people about than awakening. And there is a joy of the intentionality of our coming together this way. The Tibetan yogi Milarepa, the block cut, many of you have seen that woodcut of him, the pictures of him, and he's always the tonkas, he's always sitting with his one hand, he's sitting in front of his cave with his hand behind his ear listening to the sounds of the universe. The quieter we get, the more we hear. The quieter our minds, the more we hear more of the universe. When you're quiet, you hear your own body, you hear your own feelings, you hear your past, you hear your future, you hear all of the environment in which you're living. You hear the needs of all of the beings around you. Over Mahatma Gandhi's tomb is the statement, one of his statements, think of the poorest person you've ever met and ask whether your next action will be of any use to that person. Conscious living is being able to hear all of it, out and out in concentric circles, out and out and out. So you can hear the pulsing of the universe, you can hear the needs, you can hear the feelings, you can hear the capacities, and out of that listening comes an action, your next action. The secret is that instead of identifying with being the actor, you identify with being the listener. This is a method now we're talking about. You listen and action happens. You aren't making your heart pump, but it's pumping. Many of you drive automobiles, and you make incredibly complex decisions about centrifugal and centripetal force and speed of acceleration and deceleration and braking and all kinds of complex judgments, and all the time you're thinking about something else. It's all going on what anatomists would call base brain. Pretty soon you get to the point where you are resting quietly, just listening and tuning. And then out of that tuning is coming action. The action is just happening. Your life is happening. And you are sitting quietly in a space around it. This is very much connected with trust. And it's a very tricky one, because most of us live our lives as if we think we have to make it happen, or it would all fall apart. It's like I've got to get behind myself and push. I've got to. And it's interesting that when you slow down a little bit and listen, your action comes out of a different place. And what was at one moment some terrible, terrible imposition on your freedom becomes something that you joyfully enter into. I remember a very fascinating conversation that I've talked about before. This happened many years ago, and it happened actually in 1964 or 5, I think, when I was in the acid business primarily. And I met a violinist, Isaac Stern, at a party. And Isaac said to me, you're into this LSD business. He said, I'd like to ask you a question. He said, if I took LSD, would I still want to play the fiddle? And I said, well, that all depends, Isaac, on why you were playing the fiddle in the first place. If you were playing it to please your mother, you probably wouldn't. So you'd take LSD, and then you'd say, I'm not going to do that anymore. You'd feel freed, so you'd stop playing the fiddle. And then maybe for 3 or 4 years, you just, who knows what you'd do, you'd float around. And then after a while, you'd quiet down, and you'd listen, and you would hear in the totality of things the incredible talent you have, and the joy of bringing music into people's hearts, and your capacity. And then you play the fiddle again, and you play it much better than you play it now. And he said, I think I won't take LSD. Because most people won't risk giving it all up to be it all. They're afraid that if they let go of the control mechanism, that the whole thing's going to turn into chaos. It's interesting, people say, well, I don't want to hear that there is not a lot of free will on this plane, because I don't think, if you tell me that it's all law unfolding, I don't think I'll do anything. I don't want to do anything. There's nothing to do. So that's right. Well, then I won't do anything. Okay, which nothing are you going to do first? Well, I'm going to lie in bed. Well, that's something. Then what? Well, I need to go to the toilet. Okay, that's the next thing. Now what? Well, I'm kind of hungry. Well, there's nothing in the refrigerator. Well, and so it goes. And suddenly there you are living life, not out of ought and should, but out of, boy, I mean, it's just like going to the toilet. I mean, it just happens when it happens. Because that's the way of things. We have these incredible prefrontal lobes. And they're fantastic because they allow us to symbolize, to plan the future and remember the past, to have fantasies, to do all kinds of stuff. And we are really quite unique in that. The problem is that they get you thinking about how it ought to be, and you start to live in your thought of how it ought to be rather than how it is. You get ahead of yourself, it's called. It's called getting ahead of yourself. You say, gee, I really ought to meditate. So you sit down and you meditate. You know, I'm meditating, I'm meditating, I'm meditating, I'm meditating, I'm meditating, I'm good, I'm meditating, I'm meditating. I ought to meditate. It's 7 o'clock, I ought to meditate. 20 more minutes, I ought to meditate. That's different than a place where you just sort of want to be quiet. And suddenly, that's the line, Ramana Maharshi, that great line. He said, I didn't eat. They said I was fasting. Hear the distinction? Rooted in that, what I'm talking about now is a certain kind of faith or trust. Trust in our beings. Learning to trust in what is. Well, at the moment, I'm going to stop. At the moment, I mean, it's like saying, well, at the moment, really what I am is horny and I want to get laid. I mean, but that's not good. I want to get holy. I want to go to God. See? Okay. Well, I'd start with we are. Because God doesn't lie there or then. This is it. And it's going to be, as we explore through the weekend, through our humanity, not in spite of it, that we are going to be able to live in spirit. That's what this weekend is about, learning how to live through your humanity, not in spite of it. Here's a line from Hermann Hesse. The way to innocence, to the uncreated, and to God leads on, not back. Not back to the wolf or to the child, but ever further into sin, ever deeper into human life. The end game is not to be a renunciate. It's not to push away life. It is to be involved in the moment, which includes life, but be involved with it in a way in which your consciousness is both in it and not in it at the same moment. You are awakening out of standing somewhere, meaning standing in your separateness. But to stand in the oneness and deny the separateness is still standing somewhere. There's nowhere to stand. You've got to be all of it all at once. The whole process of awakening is the acknowledgement of your own light. All of life is the vehicle for this process. That's what it's about. All of it is method. You don't go to an ashram to do method and then leave it. There's no falling off the path. There's no plateaus. There's no, I lost it. Oh God, what's happened? I'm not as high as I used to be. That is all process. This is it. This is your life. There's no part of it that isn't in this little dance of the one going into the two to become the one, or the two becoming the one in order to dance as two. You can look at it from either point of view. The same thing happening. Questions? Yeah. I'll repeat the questions too. Yes. Yeah. To repeat the question. The question was that 2 years ago, speaking in the Darrow School, I said that about not fearing a nuclear holocaust. And because of the vast following I have, is that the way you said it? Large following, I think. I made it vast. It's led many people to be very passive about something that is very of great concern. That's the question. See, what is rooted in the root of one of the roots of your question is that you think people act primarily out of fear. Now, let's just say that I thought it was all right that the world ended. Does that mean that I would not do anything to stop nuclear holocaust? And here is where we've got to talk about that one of the two, the one coming back into the two. See, like I said before this morning, I'm a human being. I have a human heart. My human heart has a lot of pain and fear in it because of the suffering of people or the imminent suffering. I just read a book called Black Rain, which you might have read it. It's by an old Japanese man, describing the day of Hiroshima, when people didn't even know what had happened. They were miles away, and suddenly they were bleeding under their skin, and their hair was falling out when they go to scratch their hair, and they didn't know what had happened, because nothing had happened except this big mushroom in the sky. And just opening to what the quality of that horror is about. That's my humanity. And as a human being who has gotten high enough, off and on, to realize that everybody is a brother or a sister, that is, we are a family, the family of humanity, I realize there's no way that I can possibly act as if to deny what I know that way, as a human being. That's what Gandhi's statement is that I talked about this morning. Think of the poorest person you've ever known and ask whether your next act will be of use to that. It's got to, your acts end up, as you become more conscious, your acts become more, what I've said about listening, more in harmony with the totality of the way things are. And the way things are in the world of forms is that human energy, human attitudes and thoughts and concepts are what build bombs and what don't build bombs and what stop the building of bombs. And therefore, as a human being, I will do what I can to end suffering wherever I find it. And that would include, I think, protesting against nuclear proliferation. At the same moment, there's another part of me that is what you heard at the school, that looks at the universe and says, yes, that's the way it is. And that paradox, or that stretching of consciousness, leads one to do what you can do to right the wrongs, to bring beauty, to bring peace, to bring health, to bring harmony, and at the same moment allows it to be what it is. And that's a strange paradox, because what it is includes your trying to change it. So that you end up doing your action in peace, not in anxiety. And that's the difference between action, which brings peace by its nature of its doing it. It would be nice if, when you protest against nuclear proliferation, you do it in such a way, because of the nature of your being, that the act of protest brings peace into the mind of the person whose actions you are protesting against, to the point where that person no longer is so paranoid that they want to increase the might of nuclear preparedness from their point of view. Can you hear that issue? It's, again, the two and the one. It's the balancing act. The fear that all of us have is that if we don't do things out of negative motivation, somehow we're going to be inert. And the truth of the matter is that the quieter and emptier you are, the more joyously you're involved. And which way are you involved? You listen to hear what your part is. And one person protests against this, another person makes a statement by doing that, and I can't sit around judging who should do what. I just know what I got to do. And some people say, well, what do you mean? Shouldn't everybody? You know, I was in Florence, Italy last winter, and I was hanging out with Michelangelo, you know, in one way or another. And there was David and the captives, and then I went to Rome and to the Sistine Chapel. And I knew that when Michelangelo was in Florence, the Medicis were really raising hell with the whole scene, because some of them weren't as groovy as some of them. And I can imagine Michelangelo working with his chisel and his hammer, and somebody coming along and saying, hey, Mike, stop screwing around with that stone. We got to go down and protest what the Medicis are doing. And Michelangelo's saying, gee, no, I just got to keep doing this thing with a stone. The Medicis have come and gone. Now, maybe with the bomb, the stone's going to come and go. Flip. Okay. But you've got to allow for the complexity of what it is that exists. If you spend all your energy warding off the fears that your mind is focusing on, that's all you get this lifetime. Yeah. Would I comment on my understanding of the consciousness of children and infants? Well, the story I like to tell is a woman coming up to me with her baby, who was a beautiful, fat baby with just an exquisite face, and saying, "Isn't my baby just like the Buddha?" And I thought about that for a while, and I said, probably not. Because the difference is that in the terms of Ramakrishna, for the Buddha, the seeds are cooked, and for the baby, the seeds aren't cooked, and they're just waiting to manifest. The baby has taken a birth, most likely, like 99%, most likely has taken a birth in order to cook some seeds, meaning work through some attachments. So the baby is sitting there as a latent karmic package just waiting to bloom. It's one of those packages you get from the seed store. It's going to have all kinds of things you never expected, you know, like a little purple and a little green, a little this color and that color. While the Buddha has cooked the seeds and just is. Now, there are similarities in the sense that the baby is very innocent, in the sense that it has not yet developed a subject-object attachment. It's not yet developed the sense of me and we're me, like the point where it pinches its toe and pinches the bedpost and pinches its toe and pinches its bedpost, notices there's a difference. That one, where that starts, you know, in psychological and physical terms of what are the boundaries of self and other from a thinking mind point of view. In other words, before it starts to stay in its thinking mind, rather than going into the space between thoughts where it is initially. It is initially, but it's still got like a DNA code, a latent thing to manifest of unconsciousness. To the extent that the parents and the environment of a child are very spacious, meaning aren't busy locking that being into a solid reality of horses have 4 legs and you're a child and you're this and you're that and I'm this and I'm that, and yet can function within all of the discriminations necessary to keep us efficient on the physical plane. The child can stay conscious for a long, long time. Sometimes, nowadays, pretty well, almost all the way through, pretty well through. I mean, I'm meeting 11, 12-year-old kids who by then, usually they're pretty closed. And I'm meeting them open, and they've been open all the way through because they have very groovy parents who are dealing with truth and straightness and humanness and so on. And that's very extraordinary. However, you've got to understand that just because you are awakening does not necessarily mean any of your kids are or ever will in this lifetime from where I'm sitting. Because it may be the karma of a Neanderthal being who has just taken the first prefrontal lobe birth to be your child, you know. And it may be your work as this very conscious Buddha to run through one more, you know, IQ 20 as a child. So you can't, and you might even have one that is and one that isn't. I mean, you might have one, you know, one Ramakrishna and one dull normal. But it gets very far out because to the extent that you are not identified with your separateness and your unique individual differences, you won't define the being that way either. And it's interesting because I have dealt now with two mothers who have had children who have been mongoloid. And one of those mothers, who was in Alaska at the time, this was her 8th child. And when it came, she called up and she was freaking, and then almost, it seemed to me very quickly, within 6 months, she was a very evolved being. Within 6 months, she had opened her being to this new moment. And from then on, all the letters were, everybody in the family feels so graced. It's like having an angel that has come and joined us. And the daughter lived till about 20, I guess, which I guess is average or old for mongoloid, I don't know. And then died. And all during the time, it was just like having absolutely the sweetest, most innocent vibration. And all the kids loved it. Everybody ended up loving this girl. The other mother, who was a midwife of the new age, had a mongoloid child. And she went into a severe depression, and she couldn't handle it, and didn't want the child. And didn't want to hear anything. See the difference between the identification with individual differences. First mother has all the pain, and at the same moment something else. And it's interesting, if you work in mental hospitals or you're working in prisons, I walk into death row in San Quentin, and I walk up to a guy who is a double murderer. And I know that on the game plan, he shouldn't be loose in the street because I think he's capable of killing somebody else, and I don't think that's cricket, and I'm going to pay to keep him right where he is. But I look into his eyes, and here we are. We're just two beings. You got yours, I got mine. How you doing in there?